Okay, so yes, currently I'm coordinating this business English program, and it's one of the largest GE courses offered in CityU. And last September, I took over the coordination from the previous coordinator, and in the meantime, we received a request for a full revision from the College of Business for several reasons that I'll mention later. So basically, this talk will document the syllabus development, in particular, the kind of issues we identified in the current syllabus in relation to digital communication, and also how these issues are going to be addressed in the new syllabus. And as you can see on my slides, I said bridging the old and the new. So what do I mean by that? When it comes to digital communication, we often think about new technologies and how they have an impact on the way we communicate. So quite often, we have to adjust old face-to-face communication norms for new digital platforms. For example, now a lot of business meetings are moved online. So this started around 2010. And on the other hand, we also develop new digital communication norms on old digital platforms. For example, well, emails already existed in the 90s. They were already text and HTML emails. However, the way we use emails and the style of our emails today are very different from the 90s. So in this talk, the issues and the changes, we are making in the syllabus will revolve around these two aspects. So a little bit more background of the course for the audience. So we usually have around 1,000 students, undergraduate students from the College of Business enrolled on our course every academic year. And for each section, we have about 25 students, no more than 25 students. And the kind of teaching materials we use include a textbook from 2010, and also some materials the course team has built on the textbook over the last 10 years. And our teaching and assessment revolve around 4 kinds of business communication: email writing, business meeting, business presentation, and a business proposal. And in this talk, I will focus on email writing and business meeting. So currently our teaching materials, well, actually our teaching materials for business meetings have always been focusing on face-to-face meetings, and they are based on studies on face-to-face meetings. So we teach purposes and the audience of business meeting, different roles in the business meeting, including chairperson, secretary, and participants, also how to write agenda, also the meeting language for different purposes, including how to give information or opinions, how to agree or disagree or interrupt. Also intonation and pronunciation, body language and gestures. So both verbal and nonverbal communication. So for the assessment, before the pandemic started, all our assessment took place on campus. So students were having face-to-face face-to-face meetings like in this picture. So basically, each group, about 5 students, sometimes 4, they sit around this table to conduct a meeting. And generally speaking, the vibe on campus was pretty good, even for the weak groups. So they generally put a smile on their face and they use gestures. So generally speaking, the meetings look quite natural. But after the pandemic started, we had to move all our assessments online in a rush, including the business meeting assessment. So it's been moved on Zoom since then. So something like this. But then issues came up. We noticed that students are more likely to have communication breakdowns in virtual meetings compared to face-to-face meeting assessments. So the worst case would be a minute of dead air. So this means that, only teaching, so the teaching materials for face-to-face business meetings are not good enough to cope with some online situations. So then I did a quite loose analysis, needs analysis, by looking at 10 videos of virtual business meeting recordings of our students and 10 face-to-face business meeting recordings we had a few years back, just to see what's going on there and why there is this high chance of having communication breakdowns. So the first reason might be that, the camera position and the affordances of virtual platforms. As we can see in this screenshot, even if some students, they position their cameras pretty well, but the gestures are still not shown on camera. So this means that virtual platforms may limit the number of nonverbal resources we can use. So this relates to what Jane said earlier. It was very challenging to develop, to build a good relationship in virtual environments. So I think that's also kind of reflected in this case. And also I remember there was a poor student. He really struggles with facial expressions, head movements, gestures. So generally, he looks like he's dead inside when he presents or talk in a meeting. So finally, he picked up some gestures in class, but they were in the end not shown on camera. So it was really frustrating for him. So this limitation sort of makes it more difficult for students to cope with virtual meetings. And also now we have the mute function, which is helpful just in case, it's very noisy in the, for example, like in my office now, it's very quiet, but sometimes we are in a very noisy environment. We prefer to mute ourselves. But mute function also means less back channeling. Because if you think about, face-to-face meetings, like a small one, in a conversation or when your colleague is speaking, you will say something like, yeah, right. So that's back channeling. So we are showing our colleagues that we're following, we're interested in your speech, we're being supportive. But when everybody is muted in a virtual meeting, the speaker may feel, not supported enough by the colleagues. And also if, let's say, a student mutes herself, I think she may also feel less compelled to press the unmute button to chip in and make a comment. So that again has contributed to this awkward vibe in virtual meetings. I also noticed a lack of meeting language when technical issues appear. So it's not uncommon that a member of the team suddenly leaves the meeting. But the common reaction of the other team members is silence. And then they are actually aware of the situation, because I could tell that some members were surprised and some members couldn't help giggling, but nobody said anything or came in to take in charge of the situation. So it's usually like 10 seconds of a very awkward moment. And then they just move on and completely ignoring the fact that a person just left the meeting. There are also other technical issues like lagging, freezing, glitching, and sometimes I couldn't really understand what a student is saying, but the other group members, they just pretend that they understood everything. nothing is going wrong, and they just moved on. So this means that the discussion in this meeting lacks coherence because everyone plays a role in the meeting, and each student was assigned a task for the meeting. For example, if a student plays the role of a public relation manager, she may have to provide some information. So if that information is not there, then some agenda items may not be addressed at the end of the meeting, but the chairperson just pretended that everything is okay. All the agenda items are have been addressed in his or her summary. So, and I also noticed that those communication breakdowns, they often happen towards the end of the meeting. Because, you know, before the communication breakdown, actually a lot of very, you know, awkward moments already happened, and they weren't taken care of by anyone in the team. So, so this awkward vibe slowly builds up to the point that a communication breakdown occurs. So if we don't address these issues for our students, very likely they will have similar issues at their future workplace. So in the new syllabus, I added a few items to address these issues. For the course intended learning outcomes, I included a specific item for verbal communication, virtual communication. For teaching and learning activities, we will discuss with our students the differences between face-to-face and the virtual meetings. And they will practice the meeting language for coping with technical issues. We will also remind them of camera position and the different dynamics in relation to nonverbal communication in virtual environment. For assessment, we will ask our students to do a virtual decision-making meeting, even after the pandemic clears up, because apparently virtual meetings are more challenging to our students. So we want to prepare them well. Now moving on to business emails. So I'd like to share some comments from the College of Business with you. So they did some group interviews with their students. So they were asked about what they think about the current tasks for teaching and assessments. So the comments we received are artificial, formulaic, and not reflective of communication tasks in the workplace. So I was wondering, why do the tasks look artificial and formulaic, and how would the College of Business like us to teach email writing? But there weren't much details given by CB, so I had to look into the issues myself. But before I share with you the issues with email teaching, I'd like to share with you one typical material we use for teaching currently. So basically, we only teach one particular type of email, which is called bad email. Basically, students are tasked to deliver a negative message in their email to a colleague. It could be internal or external. So a typical scenario created for the course looks like this. You don't have to read it through. I'm going to summarize it briefly for you. So this particular scenario asked our students to imagine that they are the public relation manager of a company that is going to organize a music event. But the public relation manager received some complaints from the residents who live close to the music venue. So they were concerned about the noise, drinking, smoking, leaving litter, and the truck delivering, which may disrupt their children's school minibus pickup. So students are tasked to write a bad news email to inform another manager of the concerns, and also propose some suggestions. So this is the scenario we created for teaching and also for assessment based on the materials in the textbook. And here is a typical sample, email sample we provide to our student. So we told them to write a neutral subject. Don't give away the bad news right away because it may stress out the reader. And then the opening salutation. And the first paragraph should be a buffer. So our students and some instructors find this paragraph a little bit fake. I don't know what the audience thinks about this paragraph, and I would be very interested to hear practitioners' opinions about this sample later. And then we tell them to write a transition before giving the bad news. So you can see that actually the email style is very diplomatic. And then we tell them to write this chunky paragraph with many suggestions to address the bad news, and also a positive note at the end, and then closing salutation. So you can see that it's very long, it's very lengthy, it's very formal, and also very diplomatic. So what are the possible issues? So the first thing I did was to look into the textbook, because all our materials are based on the textbook, and also particularly the references listed in the textbook. But to my surprise, although the book was published in 2010, most of the references are from the 90s or even the 80s. So for example, this chapter is about short routing emails. And we can see that these two are from the 80s and this one is from the 90s. And chapter 9 is about bad news email writing. And we can see that 6 out of 9 references are from the 90s. So basically, we're preparing our students to work in the 90s. Well, arguably the 90s is a better time than today, perhaps, but too bad we can't go back in time. So very likely the communication norms today have changed. So the next question I had was, what are the new norms? What are the changes in the last 2 decades? So perhaps the first change could be the definition of a short or a long email, because today we receive many more emails each day. We're bombarded by emails, and you know, naturally we have less time for reading each email. And as the writer, we tend to keep our message precise and concise for the convenience of our readers. And the second change might be that today's email style is generally less formal because people often type emails on mobiles, and the language of instant messaging has perhaps been brought into email writing. But I put all the question marks on the slides because I didn't really find hard evidence to support these claims. But I did find a couple of studies that could potentially give us an idea about the changes and support these claims. So let's have a look. So in this paper from 2017, a typical email sample looks like this. So you can see that it's pretty short and it's informal. And another paper from 2015 looked into the email communication in a British company. And they found that informal emails accounted for 58.4%, while formal emails accounted for 42.6%, meaning that today very likely we write more informal emails than formal emails. But if you look at the samples provided in the course, in the textbook, they're generally pretty formal. And the paper also says that the average length of an informal email is around 54 words. But if we look at the textbook, it's around 120 words. So basically doubles the number given in this paper. And this paper also found that the average length of a formal email is around 299 words. But if we look at the samples we provide for our course in the textbook or the materials we built for our students, the length is between 350 words to 400 words, so much longer than the average of formal emails. And a third change might be that the purposes for writing a business email have changed, because today we write emails for many different purposes, and the email is just a platform, and it doesn't have only one or two structures. For example, we write emails to invite people, to confirm something, to request something, to congratulate someone, to make a summary, give a complaint. Could be adjustment email, marketing email, bad news email, but we only teach that one type. So no wonder why our students find it very formulaic. And the second issue I identified is a lack of intertextuality in teaching. Because right now, every scenario created for teaching assessment is a standalone event. But in reality, email writing is often one event in a chain of events. So, so this diagram from this paper from 2016, we can see that email is placed in the middle, because this email writing event perhaps follows another prior event, which could be a telephone discussion, reading a project report, having a meeting, or reading a prior email. So this prior event leads to the email writing activity, and then this email writing activity then leads to another event, which could be again an email response, another meeting, or another telephone discussion, and so on. So this means that in the email writing, there is intertextual language that refers back to a prior event, or referring forward to a future event. And also, we don't only write standalone emails, we also write embedded emails. Intertextuality also means using attachments and hyperlinks, but all these elements are missing in the current teaching teaching and learning activities and assessments. So this may have also contributed to the fakeness of our tasks. And the third issue is a lack of social variables in the scenario design. As I showed you earlier, this study about formality, it also pointed out that formality is affected by social distance, power relation, and cultural differences, but we rarely consider these variables in our scenario design. So basically, the reasons why we receive these comments is that we use outdated materials, the communication norms have likely changed in terms of length, formality, purposes. And we only teach one type of email, as if email writing is one single genre. And there's a lack of intertextuality, there's a lack of social variables in scenario design. So to address these issues, in the new syllabus, I made a few changes. For course intended learning outcomes, I added this item particularly for intertextuality. And for teaching and learning activities, we will ask students to analyze a variety of samples, short, long, formal, informal. They will also practice with a variety of contexts, invite somebody, congratulate somebody, write an adjustment email, bad news email, or write a summary. They will also practice one quick email writing in a chain of different activities so as to increase the intertextuality. So, because right now we dedicate 3 weeks to email writing training, but the new syllabus will allow them to spread these activities across 6 or 7 weeks. So in each week, they have a small practice that is embedded in a chain of activities. So for assessment, we will ask students to individually plan and write a business email for assessment before or after another assessment. The other assessment could be meeting, presentation, or report. So for example, we could ask students to report a meeting to a colleague. So this approach will allow several assessments to be linked together. So the assessments will form a chain of events as well to simulate the real world situation. This will also make it a lot easier for the course team to design a scenario for assessments, because students, it will be the students who do the meeting, so they already know the context. So we don't have to really think about, to use our imagination to create a scenario for our students. So to summarize the talk, with the changes in the syllabus for business meeting, we hope that we can help students to adjust old face-to-face communication norms for new digital meeting platforms. And also the changes we made for email writing should be able to update students on the new digital communication norms on all digital platforms. So that's pretty much for my talk, and later I will be very interested to hear the audience opinions, particularly the practitioners' opinions on the samples I showed you earlier. Thank you very much.